There are times when fate weaves impossible threads between two souls that everything should keep apart. In the wild stretches of New Mexico, where the dry wind whispers the desert's secrets, Elise Warren clutched two newborns and a torn blue handkerchief to her heart, the last trace of her vanished mother. The heavy silence of the abandoned cabin was broken by the snap of a branch under the foot of Arawan, a Comanche hunter whose senses were as sharp as a blade. The evening wind swirled red dust in ghostly spirals around the dilapidated cabin. Arawan adjusted his bow against his shoulder and pricked up his ears. The cry he'd heard moments earlier wasn't that of a wounded animal, nor the groan of dry wood in the night breeze. It was something more fragile, more human. His moccasins made no sound on the hardened earth as he slipped towards the gaping opening that had once been a door. The scent of fear reached him even before he could make out the figure huddled in the darkest corner of the room. A white woman, her blonde hair matted with sweat and dust, held two small, weakly squirming bodies close. "Who's there?" she whispered, her voice broken by exhaustion. Arawan hesitated. His first impulse was to turn back. The pale face's problems weren't his concern. But something in the way the woman cradled her children painfully reminded him of memories he preferred to bury. His own wife, Ayanna, had made that same protective gesture the day. "You can't stay here," he said, emerging from the shadows, his bow lowered, but still in hand. The night wind kills fast in these lands. Elise flinched but didn't run. Her green eyes, hollowed by fatigue, scanned the face of the copper-skinned man whose black hair was braided with feathers and beads. She'd heard so many terrifying stories about the Comanches, but this one didn't look like the demons described in the Eastern newspapers. "Just for tonight," she pleaded, tightening her grip on the twins. "I've got nowhere to go." The blue handkerchief she'd tucked between her arms to shield the children from the cold caught Arawan's eye. The fabric was torn, worn, but she clung to it like a talisman. He recognized that way of holding on to the last vestiges of a lost world. "What's your name?" he asked, crouching at a respectful distance. "Elise. Elise Warren. And you?" "Arawan." The name sounded strange in the young woman's mouth. She'd pronounced it with a softness that contrasted with the brutality she'd known in recent months. Arawan observed the two small, sleeping faces, so vulnerable, so similar to that of his lost son. "Why are you on the run?" he asked, though he already guessed the answer in her haunted eyes. Elise lowered her head. How could she explain to the stranger Samuel's tyranny, his threats, his determination to make these children exact copies of himself? How could she say she'd rather die in the desert than see her sons grow up in the darkness of his soul? Words tumbled from Elise's throat like pebbles rolling down a well. Samuel Warren. That name alone made her voice tremble. She recounted her hurried escape from Denver, the veiled, then open threats from this man who claimed to love her while wanting to possess her. The twins, Thomas and William, were only 3 weeks old, but Samuel was already talking about sending them to a military school to forge their character. "He says I'm too weak to raise them," she murmured, stroking Thomas's forehead. "That my soft ideas will turn them into cowards." Arawan listened without interrupting, recognizing in her account the echo of his own suffering. He too had seen powerful men decide the fate of innocence, impose their worldview through force and intimidation. When she finished, a heavy silence settled between them, broken only by the children's steady breathing. "Come on," he finally said, rising. "This cabin will fall to pieces before dawn." Elise hesitated. Following this stranger into the night could mean her death, but staying here was certain suicide. She carefully folded the blue handkerchief and tucked it into her belt before taking the twins into her arms. The Comanche village appeared like a constellation of soft fires in the darkness. Teepees stood in concentric circles, their stretched hides casting shifting shadows in the firelight. Dogs barked at their approach, alerting sentinels who emerged silently from the shadows, bows drawn. Arawan exchanged a few quick words in his native tongue. Elise understood nothing, but the calm tone of his voice reassured her. An elderly man, his face weathered by the sun and marked with ritualistic paints, approached them. His dark eyes scrutinized the young woman for a long time before settling on the children. "Iron Eagle says you bear the mark of flight," Arawan translated. "He wants to know if you bring war with you." "I only want peace," Elise replied, her voice trembling. The chief slowly nodded and gestured towards one of the tents. A middle-aged woman emerged, her gray hair braided with shells and colorful feathers. Her maternal smile warmed Elise's heart more surely than a campfire. "Soft Moon will take care of you tonight," Arwen explained. "Tomorrow, we'll see." Inside the teepee, the air was warm and smelled of dried herbs. Soft Moon prepared a layer of furs for Elise and the children, then handed her a bowl of steaming broth. The liquid had an unfamiliar but comforting taste, and for the first time in weeks, Elise felt her muscles relax. Soft Moon babbled softly in Comanche while examining the twins. Her expert hands checked they had no fever, that their small limbs were well formed. She smiled at Elise and spoke a few words the young mother didn't understand, but whose kindness was universal. Outside, the wind continued its nightly lament, but in that bubble of human warmth, Elise closed her eyes for the first time since her escape. The blue handkerchief rested under her hand, a soft reminder of a past she didn't want to forget, even if the future remained uncertain. Dawn broke like a golden wound on the horizon, chasing away the night's shadows, but not the doubts gnawing at Elise's heart. She emerged from the teepee with the twins, discovering the village in the daylight. Women were already busy around the fires preparing morning meals, while children ran laughing between the tents. Arwen was waiting for her by a small fire, crouched before the flames. He'd traded his bow for a knife with which he was carving a piece of wood. His precise, patient movements hypnotized Elise, who recognized in that concentration the same intensity she once put into her embroidery work. "Sleep well?" he asked, without looking up from his work. "Better than I have in weeks," she admitted, sitting beside him. The children nestled against her. The morning wind gently lifted the strands escaping from her undone hair. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel observed with suspicion or possessive desire. Here, she was just a mother with her children, no more, no less. "What are you carving?" she ventured to ask. Arwen showed her the rough sketch of a small horse. Details came alive under his skilled fingers, the flowing mane, the slender but strong legs. "For them," he said, gesturing to Thomas and William with a flick of his chin. "When they grow up." This simple sentence moved Elise deeply. Samuel had never thought of his son's future in terms of play or happiness. To him, they were just extensions of his power, heirs to be shaped according to his will. The idea that a stranger could imagine their childhood with such tenderness choked her up. A young woman approached them, her black hair adorned with white beads. Her graceful stride and clothes, mixing white and Indian influences, hinted at a special status in the community. "I'm Clara Moon," she said in perfect English, tinged with a slight accent. "My father was Comanche, my mother Irish. Iron Eagle asked me to speak with you." Elise straightened up, worried. Were they going to kick her out of the village? Clara must have sensed her tension because she sat down with a reassuring smile. "He wants to know how long you plan to stay with us, and if the man pursuing you will come all the way here." I don't know," Elise stammered. Samuel's determined. "But maybe if I stay hidden long enough." "Men like him never give up," Arwen interjected, his voice dark. "They'd rather destroy what they can't possess." Clara nodded gravely. She'd seen too many women flee the violence of tyrannical husbands or fathers not to recognize the signs. "Do you have papers proving the children are yours?" she asked. Elise took the blue handkerchief from her belt, in which she'd wrapped the crumpled birth certificates. Clara examined them carefully. "It'll take more than that if Samuel Warren brings in lawyers," she murmured. "But we've got time to think." The wind suddenly picked up, stirring the dust and making the teepee walls flap. Elise instinctively tightened her grip on her sons, as if this gust already carried the threats of her past. But Arwen placed a calming hand on her shoulder. "Here, the wind protects as much as it reveals," he said. "Listen close. It'll tell you when danger's near." For the first time since her escape, Elise found herself hoping this refuge could become something more permanent. The days passed like grains of sand in the desert wind. Elise learned to recognize the village's rhythms, the hours when the women gathered to weave, when the men went hunting, the sacred moments when the community fell silent to listen to the elders tell stories of their ancestors. Soft Moon became her silent guide, showing her how to prepare medicinal herbs, how to properly feed the children with goat's milk when her own dried up from stress. The old woman spoke little English, but her gestures were worth all speeches. She taught Elise Comanche lullabies, those soft melodies that soothed Thomas and William better than any remedy. One morning, as she cradled the twins under a teepee awning, Elise took out her blue handkerchief to spread it in the sun. The tears had grown larger during the journey, and the fabric threatened to disintegrate completely. Clara, passing by, stopped when she saw the despair on her face. "It's all I have left of her," Elise murmured, stroking the fragile fabric. "My mother embroidered it herself before I was born." Clara knelt beside her and examined the handkerchief carefully. Despite the wear, one could still make out the delicate patterns. Intertwined flowers, birds in flight, symbols of hope and renewal. "We can save it," she declared. Soft Moon knows ancient techniques for restoring precious fabrics. That very afternoon, several women of the tribe gathered around Elise. They brought colorful threads, finely carved bone needles, tiny beads recovered from old trade routes. Soft Moon directed the operation with the benevolent authority of a matriarch. Elise watched, fascinated, as these expert hands transformed her heirloom into something new. They didn't just mend the tears, they magnified them, turning them into decorative patterns that merged her mother's European art with Comanche traditions. Each stitch was a prayer, each color a symbol of rebirth. "In Comanche, we say nothing is truly broken," Clara explained, translating Soft Moon's words. "Everything can be transformed into something more beautiful, if you accept change." Erwan appeared at the edge of the circle of women, holding in his hands the small wooden horse he had finished carving. The details were strikingly realistic, but it was the contained emotion in each curve that touched the heart. He gently placed it near Elise. "For when they learn to play," he said simply. Elise looked up at him, overwhelmed by his constant thoughtfulness, the way he thought of her children's future without ever asking for anything in return. Samuel had never made anything with his hands, preferring to buy affection with expensive, impersonal gifts. The evening wind rose, softer than usual, caressing their faces like a blessing. For the first time since her arrival, Elise found herself thinking not in terms of escape, but of building. Perhaps here, with these generous people, she could finally raise her sons in the peace and love they deserved. Elise's fragile serenity was shattered by the galloping of a horse approaching the village at sunset. Swift Hawk, one of the young warriors who had gone scouting towards Red Rock, was returning earlier than expected. His grave face boded ill. He quickly exchanged a few words with Iron Eagle, who frowned before signaling Clara to join them. Elise, holding the twins close, felt her blood run cold. She didn't need to understand Comanche to guess that the news concerned Samuel. "He arrived in Red Rock last night," Clara translated, her voice tight, "with an escort of 6 men and enough provisions to stay a long time." The wind picked up sharply, stirring the dust in chaotic whirls. Elise instinctively tightened her grip on her children, as if this gust already carried the scent of the threat. "What exactly is he doing?" Erwan asked, his jaw tight. Swift Hawk spoke again, his broad gestures punctuating his account. Clara translated as he went, her face darkening with each sentence. "He's not directly looking for Elise. He's too clever for that. He's presenting himself as a businessman come to invest in the region. He's offering advantageous contracts to farmers, promising to bring progress and prosperity to Red Rock. He's buying their silence," Elise murmured, her voice pale. "Worse than that," Clara continued. "He's sowing doubts about the region's safety. He's telling people his wife was kidnapped by Comanches, that she might be held against her will somewhere in the desert." Elise staggered. Samuel was twisting her escape into an abduction, her quest for freedom into victimization. He was turning public opinion against those who had welcomed her, making Erwan and his tribe criminals in the eyes of the white settlers. "Do the folks in Red Rock believe him?" Erwan inquired. "Some are still holding out," Swift Hawk replied through Clara. "But money and fear are powerful arguments. He says he only wants to get his children back and bring his wife home." Soft Moon, who had listened to the exchange in silence, approached Elise and placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. She spoke a few soothing words in Comanche, but Elise shook her head, overwhelmed by guilt. "I have to go," she said suddenly. "I can't bring trouble down on you. Samuel won't stop until he finds me." "And where would you go?" Erwan asked with a gentleness that contrasted with the firmness of his tone. "Into the desert with 2 newborns. Samuel has men, money, influence. He'd catch you before the week's out." Elise took her blue handkerchief from her belt, now beautifully restored with Comanche patterns intertwined with her mother's embroidery. Seeing it transformed like this reminded her of Soft Moon's words. Nothing was truly broken. Everything could be reborn stronger. "So what do you suggest?" she asked, clinging to that fragile hope. Iron Eagle spoke, his deep voice resounding in the evening silence. Clara translated his words with unusual solemnity. "He says that sometimes to protect the truth, you have to bring it out into the open. That lies don't stand long in the sunlight." The Comanche chief looked Elise straight in the eye and added something that made Clara smile for the first time since Swifthawk's arrival. "He also says that a mother who fights for her children is never alone, especially when she's found a new family." The next 3 days transformed Elise in a way she never would have imagined. Instead of cowering in fear, she chose to fully immerse herself in village life. If Samuel wanted to paint her as a helpless victim, she would prove him wrong. Each morning, she helped the women prepare communal meals, learning to gauge the wild spices that gave the dishes their unique flavor. Her hands, once soft and useless according to Samuel, grew strong from daily work. Soft Moon taught her the art of weaving grasses into sturdy baskets, and Elise discovered she had a natural dexterity for these delicate crafts. Most surprising was how easily she picked up Comanche. Clara marveled at how quickly she assimilated the guttural sounds and particular intonations of the language. The village children kindly laughed at her pronunciation errors, but they encouraged her with touching patience. Green-eyed Elise, they'd nicknamed her, a name that made her smile every time she heard it. Arwan observed this transformation with silent admiration. He saw her gain confidence day by day, her shoulders straighten, her gaze firm. When she cradled her children, singing the Comanche lullabies she'd learned, her voice carried a new strength that resonated throughout the village. One evening, as they sat side by side near the central fire, she confided her deepest thoughts to him. "Before coming here, I thought running was my only option," she murmured, watching the flames dance. "Samuel had convinced me I was weak, unable to care for my children without him." She took her blue handkerchief from her belt and unfolded it in the firelight. The Comanche repairs gleamed like stars in the fabric, transforming the old tears into constellations of beauty. "Now I see I always had this strength inside me. It was just dormant." Arwan nodded, understanding this inner awakening better than anyone. He himself had had to find his strength again after losing his family, to relearn how to live when all seemed lost. "The strength never left your heart," he said softly. "You just needed a safe place for it to grow." That night, Elise didn't dream of fleeing. She dreamed she stood facing Samuel, her sons in her arms, surrounded by her new family. In her dream, the wind carried not threat, but the promise of a future she would build with her own hands. The next morning, Swifthawk returned with new information. Clara translated his words with unusual gravity. "Samuel has convinced the judge in Red Rock to hold a public hearing. He claims it's for everyone's good, to clarify the situation and bring peace to the region." "When?" Elise asked, her voice no longer trembling. "In a week. He says if you don't show up, he'll take it as an admission of guilt and request federal army intervention." Elise looked around her, at these faces that had become her family, these hands that had mended her handkerchief and, by extension, her broken soul. The fear was still there, but she was no longer alone in carrying that burden. "Then we'll go," she declared, with a determination that surprised everyone, including herself. "He wants a public hearing? He'll get one." Preparing for the hearing became a whole village affair. Iron Eagle called a council of elders to decide on the strategy. Clara would spend hours with Elise, helping her phrase the complex emotions she'd learned to express in Comanche into English. Every word had to carry weight. Every sentence had to reveal the truth of her journey. Arwan, meanwhile, grew increasingly somber as the date approached. Elise caught him several times staring at the horizon, as if trying to pierce Samuel's hidden intentions. One morning, finding him sharpening his arrows with unusual concentration, she dared to address the subject that haunted them both. "You don't trust me to face Samuel," she said bluntly. He looked up at her, surprised by her frankness. In the golden light of dawn, Elise's face had lost its sickly pallor from the first few days. Her features had firmed, her green eyes shone with a determination that painfully reminded him of his late wife. "It's not a matter of trust," he replied, setting down his arrow. "It's that men like Samuel never play fair. They always have something brewing in the shadows." Elise sat near him, the twins asleep in her arms. Thomas and William had grown in recent weeks, their small faces filling out thanks to Soft Moon's attentive care and the clean desert air. "Then we have to be smarter than him," she declared. "Clara told me you had grievances against Samuel, things he's done in the past." Arwan's face hardened. Memories surfaced like a poorly healed wound. He had seen Samuel Warren order Comanche families expelled from their ancestral lands, citing fictitious development agreements. He had seen his men burn entire villages to make way for livestock ranches that never materialized. 3 years ago, Samuel had my tribe driven from our winterlands. We had to flee in the snow without enough provisions. My wife, Ayana, was carrying our 2-year-old son. She died of cold on the 3rd night. My son the day after. The words left his mouth like stones falling into a deep well. Elise felt her heart clench, finally understanding why Arwan had helped her that night in the abandoned cabin. It wasn't just compassion. It was the recognition of shared suffering. "I'm so sorry," she murmured, placing a hand on his arm. "I didn't know. Now you know why this hearing isn't just your fight," he replied, looking into her eyes. "It's our chance, all of us, to reveal who Samuel Warren truly is." If this story touches you and you want to know what happens next in this epic confrontation, be sure to subscribe to our channel. The next chapters promise revelations that will change everything. The wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of wild herbs and something else, something that felt like hope. Elise took out her blue handkerchief, now a talisman of courage, and clutched it to her heart. "Then we'll do it together," she said with a conviction that surprised Arwan with its quiet strength. "For your lost loved ones, for my children, for all those he's made suffer." That night, the village drums resonated louder than usual, as if the entire community was preparing for a battle that would far exceed a simple court hearing. The day of the hearing dawned in heavy silence. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath, as if all of nature awaited the outcome of this confrontation. Elise dressed carefully, choosing her best dress but adding a shawl woven by the village women. Over her heart, she discreetly pinned her restored blue handkerchief, visible to those who knew to look for it. The Comanche delegation accompanying her was impressive. Iron Eagle led the procession, followed by Clara, Arwan, and several elders. Soft Moon had insisted on carrying Thomas in her arms, while Elise held William close. This visible solidarity was a message in itself. This woman was not alone and abandoned as Samuel wanted people to believe. Red Rock buzzed with unusual activity. Curious onlookers had come from distant farms, drawn by rumors of an extraordinary story. Samuel had orchestrated things well. His version of events had circulated widely, painting Elise as an unbalanced wife manipulated by savages. The large tent set up for the occasion could hold 100 people. Samuel was already seated there, surrounded by his men in dark suits. He had carefully styled his appearance. Combed hair, trimmed beard, the somber look of a wounded but magnanimous man. When Elise entered, he didn't look at her directly, preferring to fix his gaze on a point above her head with an expression of feigned pain. Judge Hartwell, a portly man with grizzled sideburns, struck his gavel 3 times to call for silence. Elise immediately noticed the way his gaze avoided Iron Eagle's, the excessive deference he showed Samuel. Clara had explained that Hartwell owed money to Samuel's bank, a detail that was not insignificant. "We are gathered today to resolve a delicate situation," the judge began, his voice made reedy by age. "Mr. Warren claims his wife was influenced to abandon the marital home with their children." Samuel rose with the bearing of a man accustomed to courtrooms. His voice carried easily through the tent, warm and convincing. "Your Honor, I only wish for the return of my family. Elise has been going through a difficult time since the birth of the twins. She is not responsible for her actions. These well-meaning people have undoubtedly helped her with the best intentions, but she needs proper medical care, not primitive folklore." A murmur of approval ran through part of the audience. Samuel had hit the mark. The fear of the other, the prejudices against the Comanches, the idea that a white woman could not freely choose a different life. Elise felt her heart pound, but Arwan's hand discreetly settled on her shoulder, conveying his silent strength. She remembered Soft Moon's words. Nothing is truly broken. Everything can be transformed into something more beautiful. When the judge motioned for her to stand and testify, she rose with a natural grace that surprised the assembly. The trembling, exhausted woman Samuel described no longer existed. In her place stood a determined mother, a woman who had found her voice. "Your Honor," she began in a clear voice that carried to every corner of the tent, "I am no one's victim. I am a mother protecting her children from a man who confuses possession with love, domination with family." The silence that followed her words was so profound that you could have heard a feather drop. Elise's testimony unfolded like a long-held river, finally finding its way to the sea. She recounted her life with Samuel, not with the bitterness of a victim, but with the clarity of someone who had finally understood the mechanisms of manipulation. Her voice didn't tremble as she described the veiled threats, the daily humiliations, the way Samuel systematically isolated his prey from their family and friends. "He convinced me I was incapable of taking care of myself," she explained, looking directly at the assembly. "He kept telling me that without him I'd be lost, that my children would die from my neglect. When I discovered he wanted to send Thomas and William to military school at age 5 to correct their natural sensitivity, I understood he didn't see them as children, but as possessions to be molded." A few women in the audience nodded, recognizing in those words the echo of their own experiences. Samuel meanwhile maintained his mask of feigned pain, sometimes shaking his head like a patient husband facing his wife's delusions. Elise then took her blue handkerchief from her belt and unfolded it for all to see. The Comanche repairs shimmered in the light filtering through the tent canvas, transforming the old tears into a work of art. "This belonged to my mother," she said, stroking the restored fabric. Samuel tore it during one of his rages, because it represented a connection to my past that he didn't control. The women of Iron Eagle's tribe repaired it, but not just repaired it. They transformed it into something more beautiful than before. She held the handkerchief out at arm's length, and even those who had come to support Samuel couldn't help but admire the beauty of the work. "This is what true family is," Elise continued with growing passion. "It doesn't destroy your wounds, it transforms them into strength. It doesn't isolate you, it unites you. These people Samuel calls primitives taught me the value of community, of mutual respect, of love without possession." Samuel could no longer contain his frustration. He rose abruptly, shattering his facade of an afflicted husband. "Enough," he cried, finally revealing his true nature. "This woman has been manipulated by savages who seek to destabilize our civilization. She can no longer tell right from wrong." The mask had fallen. The audience could see the cold rage in his eyes, the way his hands clenched when he lost control of the situation. Several people instinctively recoiled, suddenly less sure of their initial prejudices. Arawan chose that moment to stand. His natural bearing commanded respect, even from those who feared him on principle. When he spoke, his deep voice resonated in complete silence. "I would like to testify about Samuel Warren's character," he said in English, with a slight accent that made his words even more impactful. Judge Hartwell seemed to hesitate, casting a nervous glance at Samuel, but refusing to hear direct testimony before such a large assembly would have been too obvious, even for a corrupt magistrate. "Very well," he conceded reluctantly, "but be brief." Arawan stepped forward into the center of the tent. The wind, which had been silent all morning, suddenly began to blow again, making the canvas flap like a war drum. The hour of truth had arrived. Arawan stood in the center of the tent like a tree rooted in ancestral earth. His gaze swept the assembly before settling on Samuel, who had paled, understanding what was about to follow. Clara stood to translate, but Arawan shook his head. "I will speak in your language," he said simply, "so that everyone understands directly." His voice carried a natural authority that silenced even the most persistent whispers. When he began to speak, it was with the precision of a man who had long prepared for this moment. 3 winters ago, Samuel Warren came to our lands with papers he claimed were legal. He said the government had sold him our winter territory to build a ranch. We protested, showed our own treaties, but he responded with force. The wind blew stronger now, making the canvas overhead vibrate like a war drum. Samuel tried to interrupt him, but Judge Hartwell, realizing that the entire assembly was hanging on Arwen's every word, motioned for him to be silent. His men burned our village one December morning. Arwen continued, his voice heavy with contained emotion. We had to flee into the snow with our children, our elders, without enough provisions for the journey. My wife, Ayana, was carrying our 2-year-old son. She died of cold on the 3rd night, my son the next day. A leaden silence fell over the tent. Even those who had come to support Samuel seemed shaken by the brutal sincerity of this testimony. Elise felt tears stream down her cheeks, finally understanding the depth of the wound that lived within Arwen. Lies! Samuel exploded, completely losing his composure. This man is a savage seeking revenge. His accusations have no legal basis. Really? Arwen asked, taking a yellowed scroll from his pouch. Then how do you explain this? He unfolded an official document that Clara had helped translate. It was correspondence between Samuel and a territorial official, dated a few months before the expulsion. The words were damning. Samuel admitted knowing the illegality of his territorial claims, but counted on the government's usual inaction regarding Indian complaints to consolidate his hold. This letter proves that Samuel Warren perfectly well knew he was stealing lands protected by federal treaty, Clara declared, translating the content for the assembly. He counted on impunity to commit this crime. Samuel's face turned brick red. He looked for support from Judge Hartwell, but the judge carefully avoided his eyes, already calculating how to distance himself from this budding scandal. This correspondence is a fake, Samuel yelled. A fabrication designed to discredit me. But his protest rang hollow even to his own ears. The audience began to murmur, their gazes turning away from him in disgust. The respectable man he claimed to be crumbled like a sandcastle before the rising tide of truth. Arwen calmly put away the document and turned to Elise. In his eyes, she read a silent invitation. It was her turn to deliver the final blow. Your Honor, she said, standing up, holding William against her heart. I'd like to add something important. The judge, completely overwhelmed by events, nodded weakly. Elise took a deep breath, aware that the words she was about to speak would change her life forever. The night I fled our Denver home, Samuel told me exactly this. If you leave with my sons, I will hunt you to the ends of the earth. And when I find you, you will regret you were ever born. She paused, letting those terrifying words echo in the silence. Are those the words of a loving husband worried about his family? The effect of these last words was immediate and devastating. The assembly recoiled collectively, as if Elise's words had physically struck every person present. Samuel, realizing that his facade was irreversibly collapsing, abandoned all pretense of respectability. You're lying, he roared, standing abruptly. You're twisting my words. I was worried, desperate to see my family leave, but his protests only worsened his case. His voice now carried that cold anger Elise knew so well, the kind that preceded his worst outbursts of rage. Several women in the audience intuitively recognized that threatening tone, and their faces definitively hardened against any sympathy for Samuel. It was then that an unexpected event changed the course of the hearing. A rider burst in through the tent entrance, his horse frothing with fatigue. The man wore the uniform of a federal messenger, and he held a sealed envelope with the territory's crest. Urgent message for Judge Hartwell, he announced, breathless. The magistrate took the envelope with trembling hands, aware that all eyes were on him. When he broke the seal and unfolded the letter, his face lost all color. He reread the document twice before looking up at Samuel with terrified eyes. What does that letter say, Your Honor? Clara asked with a politeness that didn't hide her firmness. Hartwell coughed, clearly trying to buy time. But the entire assembly was waiting, and he could no longer back down. It's a communication from the Bureau of Territorial Affairs, he stammered. A federal investigation has been opened concerning certain irregular land transactions involving Mr. Warren. The murmur that ran through the audience sounded like the rumble of an approaching storm. Samuel turned livid, understanding that his political maneuvers in Denver had finally attracted the attention of federal authorities. This investigation, the judge continued, his voice growing fainter, reveals major irregularities in the acquisition of protected Indian lands. The Department of Justice requests this court's full cooperation. Arwen exchanged a look with Clara. They had worked for months in secret to gather the necessary evidence, contacting sympathetic lawyers in Washington, documenting every one of Samuel's crimes. This letter was the culmination of their tireless efforts. Samuel suddenly realized that everything was collapsing around him. His empire, built on corruption and intimidation, would not withstand a thorough federal investigation. In a gesture of desperate rage, he pointed an accusing finger at Elise. "This is all a plot. This woman and these savages have concocted this scheme to destroy me. I won't let my sons grow up among primitives." "Your sons?" Elise repeated with a quiet strength that contrasted with Samuel's hysteria. "These children don't belong to you. They are not objects you can possess or mold to your will." She stood up, William in one arm, and took Thomas from Soft Moon's arms. Standing before the assembly, she perfectly embodied what she had become, a free and determined mother, surrounded by her chosen family. "My sons will grow up surrounded by true love, mutual respect, and the wisdom of two cultures. They will learn that true strength lies not in domination, but in protecting those you love." Judge Hartwell, seeing that public opinion had definitively shifted, struck his gavel 3 times with newfound authority. "In light of the evidence presented and this official communication, this court declares that custody of the Warren children remains fully granted to their mother, Mrs. Elise Warren." The wind that had blown so strongly throughout the hearing suddenly calmed, as if the justice rendered had appeased the very elements. Samuel remained frozen for a few moments, like a man struck by lightning. The reality of his defeat took time to penetrate his mind, accustomed to dominating and controlling. When it finally reached him, it was with the brutality of an avalanche. His face crumbled, shifting from rage to disbelief, then to something that almost resembled panic. "No," he murmured at first, then louder. "No, you don't understand. These children are my blood, my legacy. They cannot grow up among... He didn't finish his sentence, but the contempt in his voice was eloquent enough. The assembly, which had listened to him with decreasing sympathy, now openly showed its disgust. A few men stood up, pointedly moving towards the exit as if to clearly distance themselves from Samuel. Elise observed his downfall with a mixture of sadness and relief. The man who had terrorized her for so long was now just a pathetic shadow of himself, a fallen tyrant discovering powerlessness after having abused his power for so long. "Samuel," she said in a soft but firm voice, "look around you. Look at what your hatred has sown. No one supports you anymore, no one believes your lies anymore. Indeed, even his own men began to discreetly move away. The federal investigation likely concerned them too, and they had no desire to remain associated with a man in freefall." Clara approached Judge Hartwell and whispered a few words in his ear. The magistrate nodded and struck his gavel again. "Mr. Warren, in light of the charges against you and the ongoing federal investigation, I strongly advise you to leave Red Rock as soon as possible. Any attempt to approach Mrs. Warren or her children will be considered contempt of this court." Samuel raised bloodshot eyes to Elise. For a moment she thought she saw a glimmer of regret, perhaps even recognition for what he had lost through his own fault. But that glimmer quickly extinguished, replaced by a deep bitterness. "You think you've won," he hissed through gritted teeth, "but you don't know what it's like to raise children alone. You'll come back begging me when you realize your weakness." "No, Samuel," Elise replied with a serenity that surprised even herself. "I'm not alone anymore, and my children will grow up surrounded by people who know how to love without possessing." She looked around her. Arwen, whose eyes shone with pride, Soft Moon gently rocking Thomas, Clara smiling at her with affection, Iron Eagle nodding in approval. All these faces reflected the same thing: unconditional acceptance, love without expectation. Samuel seemed to understand that he had definitively lost. Without another word, he turned on his heel and walked out of the tent, closely followed by his last loyalists. The sound of their horses galloping away echoed for a moment in the silence, then faded into the immensity of the desert. Elise felt her legs give way beneath her. All the adrenaline from the confrontation suddenly subsided, leaving her drained but free. Arwen was by her side in an instant, supporting her with his strong arm. "It's over," he whispered in her ear. "You are free." In her arms, William gurgled peacefully, unaware of the drama that had just unfolded. Thomas, meanwhile, reached his small hands toward the colorful feathers adorning a Comanche woman's hair. These innocent gestures reminded Elise that what mattered was not behind her, in the painful past she had just closed, but ahead of her, in the future she would build for her sons. The wind began to blow again, but this time it carried the coolness of the evening and the promise of new days. The weeks following the hearing passed like a waking dream for Elise. News of the victory had spread far beyond Red Rock, attracting the attention of journalists and writers fascinated by this extraordinary story. But Elise met this notoriety with detachment, preferring to focus on what mattered most: building a peaceful life for her children. The Comanche village had transformed for her. What was initially just a temporary refuge had become a true home. She now spoke her host's language fluently, participated in community decisions, and her advice was listened to with respect by the elders. Thomas and William grew like desert flowers, robust and adapted to their environment. One particularly mild morning, as she sewed by the central fire, Soft Moon approached her with a mysterious smile. The old woman held a small package wrapped in soft leather. "For you," she said in her hesitant English but with obvious affection. Elise delicately untied the laces and discovered inside a magnificent beaded belt, woven in the Comanche tradition, but incorporating patterns that strangely echoed the embroidery of her blue handkerchief. The colors harmonized perfectly: the deep blue of her origins, enhanced by the ochres and reds of her new adopted land. "It's for the ceremony," explained Clara, who had approached. "Iron Eagle has decided to officially adopt you into the tribe. You and the children." Elise felt tears well up in her eyes. This formal recognition of her belonging to this community represented much more than a simple gesture. It was the complete acceptance of her new identity, the validation of her life choice. The ceremony took place at sunset, in a circle formed by the entire tribe. Iron Eagle pronounced the ritual words in Comanche, his deep voice carrying the authority of generations of ancestors. Clara translated for Elise, although Elise already understood the essence of the spoken words. "He says you are no longer a stranger among us, but a daughter of this land, a mother of this people. Your children will grow up with all the rights and duties of Comanche children." When it was her turn to respond, Elise stood, Thomas in one arm, William in the other. She had prepared her words in Comanche, wanting to express herself in the language of her adopted heart. "I am no longer the one who fled in the night," she declared in a clear voice that carried in the respectful silence of the circle. "I have become the one you helped to be born. My sons and I, we will bear this name with honor." Arwen then approached her, holding in his hands the blue handkerchief she had entrusted to Soft Moon for a final modification. When she unfolded it, Elise discovered that the women had embroidered a new motif: two small silhouettes of children surrounded by symbols of protection and growth. "So you never forget where you came from, nor where you are going," Arwen said, gently placing the fabric in her hands. That night, around the crackling fire under the stars, Elise cradled her children, singing a lullaby that blended the melodies of her Irish childhood with the Comanche rhythms she had learned. The night wind carried her voice towards the infinite horizon, like a whispered promise to the future. She sometimes thought of Samuel, wondering if he had found peace somewhere in his exile. But these thoughts no longer saddened her. She had learned that some wounds could only be healed by distance and forgetting. Here, in this community that had welcomed her unconditionally, she had discovered that true love did not seek to possess, but to liberate. And in that freedom she had finally found her strength. 6 months had passed since the Red Rock hearing, and autumn colored the New Mexico plains with its warm hues. The abandoned cabin where Arwen had found Elise that distant night had been completely rebuilt. Its sturdy walls now sheltered a happy family, and children's drawings adorned its freshly cut wooden partitions. Elise stood on the threshold, watching Thomas and William take their first wobbly steps in the red dust. At 8 months, they explored the world with the intrepid curiosity of loved children. Thomas tried to catch the colorful feathers hanging from a Comanche mobile, while William happily babbled towards a group of puppies playing near the teepees. "They grow so fast," Clara murmured as she approached, a basket of fresh vegetables in her arms. Elise smiled, automatically stroking the blue handkerchief she now wore pinned to her belt like a family talisman. The fabric had found its definitive form, A perfect blend of her maternal heritage and her new belonging, of her past and her future. "Sometimes I feel like they've always belonged here," she replied, looking at her sons with infinite tenderness. Arun emerged from the workshop he had built behind the house. His hands still bore the marks of his work. He now carved toys for all the village children, perpetuating an ancestral art while adapting it to the tastes of the new generation. The small wooden horse he had given to Thomas had become the model for a craft production that was beginning to attract the attention of traders in the region. "News from Denver has arrived," he announced, wiping his hands on his leather apron. Elise turned to him, a shadow of worry crossing her gaze. Despite her newfound serenity, she still dreaded hearing about Samuel. "The federal investigation has concluded," Arwan continued with satisfaction. "Samuel Warren has been found guilty of land fraud and illegal appropriation of Indian territories. He has been sentenced to 5 years in prison and the restitution of all stolen lands." Elise received this news with a mix of relief and melancholy. Justice was finally served, but she felt no vindictive joy. Samuel had chosen his path. She had chosen hers. The evening wind rose, caressing the plains with that particular autumn softness. It was the same wind that had accompanied her throughout her journey, a silent witness to her transformation. It now carried the scent of campfires, shared meals, and the laughter of children growing up free. Soft moon appeared from around a teepee, carrying a soft leather notebook. She had helped Elise start this project a few weeks earlier. Elise was transcribing the tribe's stories and legends, creating a bridge between Comanche oral tradition and European writing. "Have you finished the story of the eagle and the snake?" the old woman asked in her increasingly confident English. "Almost," Elise replied, taking the notebook. "I just need to write the moral." This story was about an eagle that had saved a wounded snake and the unlikely friendship that had sprung from it. It perfectly summarized her own journey. The unexpected encounter between two worlds. The initial mistrust transformed into mutual respect, then into family love. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Arwan sat beside her on the bench he had carved in front of their house. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, observing her peaceful profile. "I think I've found my place in this world," she replied simply. "My sons will grow up knowing both their inheritances, that of my Irish mother and that of their Comanche family. They will be strong from this double richness." The night wind made the village fires dance, creating a spectacle of shifting lights that seemed to celebrate this newfound harmony. Somewhere in that dance of light and shadow, Elise saw the image of her own path, from the darkness of fear to the light of true love. Has this story touched you? Have you experienced this transformation alongside Elise? Don't hesitate to subscribe to our channel to discover other extraordinary tales of courage and humanity. Like this video if it resonated in your heart, and tell us in the comments where you're listening from. Your support allows us to continue sharing these stories that remind us that love and hope always triumph. Elise Warren began this story as a woman on the run. She ended it as a fulfilled mother, a respected storyteller, an adopted daughter of a generous people. Her mother's blue handkerchief, a witness to all her transformations, would continue to carry her family's legacy to future generations.